And it's 1 o'clock on the East Coast. And as always, we'll go ahead and start our call on time. So everyone's now on mute. But when the time comes for questions or comments, I'll tell you how to request unmuting so we can call on you. My name is Acer Cole. I'm one of 2 citizen empowerment coordinators here at American Promise. And welcome to the American Promise National Citizen Leader Call for June of 2018, a call that happens on the second Saturday of each month. Thanks everyone who's taken the time out of their busy weekends to join us today. Or maybe you couldn't make it live and you're listening to this recording afterwards. Either way, you're stepping up to save our democracy, so thank you. We're honored to have an incredible guest speaker here today, Dr. Carolyn Lukensmeyer, Executive Director of the National Institute for Civil Discourse, who will speak to the importance of relationship building and respectful, civil, everyday conversation. Last month, we heard from Sandy Harris, the founder of Results, who talked us through the lobby day that we're planning on June 25th as part of the National Citizen Leadership Conference from June 22nd to the 25th in Washington, D.C. We talked about the importance of effective meetings with members of Congress on both sides of the aisle. And during the training portion of this call, we'll follow up with specifics for meetings with Republicans. Today, Dr. Lukensmeyer is going to expand our commitment to cross-partisanship, to include not just politicians, but also friends and neighbors, regardless of political position. And it's easy, tempting even, to feel animosity towards people with whom we don't agree. One of the big contributors to this is money in politics. It's easier to make an advertisement for a radically partisan candidate, emphasizing what separates us, not what brings us together. And for candidates who face more and more expensive election campaigns in this pay-to-play political landscape, it makes sense to throw cross-partisanship out the window, working to divide rather than unite. And how to best achieve this unity is the focus of today's call and of our meetings on Capitol Hill on June 25th. So as always, be thinking of questions to ask Dr. Lukensmeyer during Q&A. After we hear from Dr. Lukensmeyer, we'll hear a grassroots victory from Mitchell Rothman, a member of the Narberth, Pennsylvania American Promise Association, about his group's recent outreach meeting where they made the connection between the opioid crisis and money in politics to members of their community. Then we'll talk about this month's action, writing letters to the editor, emphasizing that getting money out of politics isn't a partisan issue, it's an American one. So listen to our guest speaker for ideas while she's speaking to include in your letter. And we'll finish up with a training on exactly what a Republican-only resolution is. It's something we'll be lobbying on with Republican members of Congress, why it's a useful tool, and how it can be a stepping stone towards a major congressional breakthrough on the 28th Amendment. So thanks everyone who's stepping up, and if you're interested in learning more about what it takes to start an American Promise Association, an APA, in your community, feel free to send me an email at azorc@americanpromise.net. That's AZORC as in cat at americanpromise.net. And I just want to start by sharing this quote from Abraham Lincoln, who said, "Do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends?" Let me just repeat that. Do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends? And with that, it's my pleasure to turn it over to Ben Gubitz, Associate Director of American Promise, to introduce our guest speaker. Hey, Ben.
Hello to Azer, and hello to all. Azer, am I coming in all right?
You're coming in loud and clear.
Fantastic. Always an honor to be here on this monthly call. Thrilled to be joining everyone here today, and absolutely thrilled to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Carolyn Lukensmeyer. As a leader in the field of deliberative democracy, Dr. Lukensmeyer has been working to restore our democracy to reflect the intended vision of our founding fathers. Prior to serving as the ED of the National Institute for Civil Discourse, Carolyn served as the founder and president of American Speaks, which was an award-winning nonprofit organization that promoted nonpartisan initiatives to engage citizens and leaders through the development of innovative public policy and tools and strategies. She was also the chief of staff to Ohio Governor Richard Celeste from 86 to 91, the first woman to actually serve in that capacity. And, you know, like most people in this country, and I think most of the folks on this call, you know, I've been somewhat alarmed and certainly dismayed at the rise of the diverse rhetoric and rancor through all levels of politics. And this is really a crucial time to have this conversation. And Dr. Lukensmeyer, before I pass it over to you, I'd love to give you an idea of the kind of folks that are joining this call today. You're talking with folks like Catherine Tastro, who is one of the leaders in winning a local resolution in one of the most conservative counties in Minnesota. Also, people like Lynn and Rod Morrison, who I'm looking forward to seeing in D.C. in a couple weeks, who are third-generation farmers in Wyoming, who, in addition to running the family farm and knocking on doors, having face-to-face conversations as they collect signatures for a statewide ballot initiative to put the 28th Amendment on the ballot in Wyoming, the first time there has been any ballot initiative in Wyoming in about 20 years. So this a historic effort and a historic leadership from Rod and Lynn. So that's just really a small dose of the kind of folks that are on this call, and many others who are, stepping up day in and day out, in sacrifice to really strengthen and rescue our democracy from big money and special interests. So with that, Carolyn, I think I'm going to go ahead and pass it on over to you.
Well, Ben, thank you very, very much. And I'm both pleased and honored to have been invited to be part of your monthly call. It is people like you who are on this call that when you gave one of the examples, Ben, I couldn't help but think of a young woman named Katie Fahey in Michigan, who she, with a small cohort of people, have managed to get on the ballot in Michigan, a effort to take redistricting out of the hands of politicians and put it into the hands of citizens. So at this very precarious moment in our history, in terms of the numbers of threats to our democracy, it is essential that individuals step up on all the kind of structural issues that are a threat to our democracy. And I give my hats off and huge kudos and thanks to all of you who are doing that on the perspective of money in politics, which is certainly one of the most corrosive. In my few minutes with you, I want to talk about how Americans feel about the state of civility in politics. And frankly, the single word that I would make the centerpiece of our conversation together is trust. And I'll come back to that in several different perspectives. But first, how do Americans feel about where our political rhetoric how it has become degraded? Two recent poll sources, and again, Ben and Azure, if you want, I can send you this link so people can look at it more deeply.
That'd be great.
There's one of the Weber Shandrick, one of the country's largest public relations and media firms, communications firm, actually worldwide, has for 8 years done a survey on civility in America. The CEO was quite prescient to start it 8 years ago, which means there's real baseline data. Their newest poll data was released on March 1st, and the critical thing that I think people want to take seriously here or take in is that 75% of Americans feel that incivility in the country is now at a crisis level. There's also very interesting data about how we're losing stature in the world, very interesting data of how Republicans and Democrats alike feel that it's important for the presidency to be civil. So the second poll data that I want to share, and I'm moving quickly here because of the short time I have. About 3 months ago, the executive vice president of the American Psychological Association approached us to say, we've done a Stress in America survey, I believe it was for 25 years. And this last round, for the very first time, the fourth highest stress factor. This is where people are saying, what is causing stress in my life? So typically it's about money, it's about a solid future for our children. The fourth highest cause at 57% this year was our current political climate. Thousands of their members were sending messages to the association. I'm seeing an uptick in anxiety disorders in my office, depression, anger, directly connected to an inability to get enough emotional distance from what's happening in our politics to not let it affect my daily life. So incivility has literally become like a virus in our communities. It's impacting families, neighborhoods, places of worship. The biggest surprise to me in my leadership position, since the election, we have gotten many calls from major U.S. corporations talking about how their product innovation teams have not come back to the same level of productivity since the 2016 election. Product innovation teams are the company's bottom lines 5 to 10 years from now. So the good news is huge numbers of Americans like yourselves are stepping up to say, what can we do about this crisis in civility? And that's what we at the Institute are trying to do, again, across all levels, individuals, interpersonal groups, communities, companies. We've created a website you might want to take a look at that shares all the tools that we make available to people. It's just www.revivecivility.org. But let me come back to the how we see using these principles of civility in meetings with elected officials. And one of our most successful programs, Next Generation, is completely working with state legislators. What happens when people treat each other and speak with each other and otherize people the way we have been witnessing for the last 18, well, now it's almost going to be coming on 2 years soon, is in fact that trust really evaporates. And people begin to see each other not just as opponents, but as enemies. So a huge focus of the work is when you're about to move into an interaction, how do you make one of the key criteria is how could I lead this conversation that would increase the trust between myself and this person? And what were the steps that I would take that would decrease the trust between myself and this person? Now, you all are advocating for the 28th Amendment. And once you've moved into the psychology of advocacy, it's sometimes difficult to step back to say, if my real goal to start is building a trust relationship, it may not be wise to lead with advocacy on my issue at this point in time. One of the positive things we've seen in Congress, and I hope many of you are aware of it, but you may not be, because it got no media coverage when it happened. The incoming class of freshmen in 2017, there were 53 or 54 of them. Of that number, 46, 28 Republicans and 18 Democrats signed a commitment to civility. It is a very strong statement. In the very first paragraph, it talks about political vitriol, particularly in campaigns, has reduced Americans' trust in our democratic institutions. And again, Ben, we can send a link to this. But one of the things is know whether the person you're sitting in front of in Congress, in the House, has in fact signed this commitment. At this point, some freshman leadership, Mike Johnson from Louisiana and Charlie Crist from Florida, have taken this out beyond the freshmen. And the last time I checked, about 121 of them had signed it. So if in fact the member you're meeting with has signed this commitment to civility, a joining question would be entry would be congratulating them on signing it and asking them to give you some examples of how signing this has made a difference in how they're working with their other colleagues in the House. If you're meeting with a member that hasn't signed this, it might be nice to hand them a copy of it and say, our experience is that the public is really watching this and you might want to consider signing it. So let me, in terms of what we've learned, I want to give you 2 or 3 principles that are essential in working to restore trust even with people who are your opponents. The first is actually stepping back to the base reality that was put into our foundational documents and is in the Lincoln quote that was shared with you earlier. We have a fundamental obligation to see our common humanity across our differences. And how do we actually recognize and make visible that that's where we're starting from? We have to enter the conversation as a two-way street. My mind could be changed as well as yours. Now, again, in a very short time, a leap I want to make, hopefully some of what I said has value to you, but I just tried to think, based on the work we've done, what might be some examples of a specific way that you would start a conversation when you're in your meetings with the elected officials, particularly if this is the first time you're meeting with this particular member. And again, the way I'm going to start this, some of you may immediately feel a reaction, but just stay with me if you will. So, you might start. We're not here to change your mind about money and politics. We're here to learn your perspective on why there's such a dramatic difference between you and most elected officials' stances on money and politics, and where the vast majority of the American public is today. You might fine-tune that question more given your deep experience in the money and politics, but it would be an invitation for them where you have said to them, today we're not here to influence you, we're here to learn how you think about this so that we may be more effective in our role creating positive links between the public and elected officials. Another option that we've seen be very, very useful is something like this. As you know, Representative or Senator X, the vast majority of Americans believe that money in politics is disempowering all but the most wealthy Americans. What would you say to those people about why the way money is working today is essential to the system's effectiveness or to the system's ability to work? And again, I'm sure this feels odd in terms of where you want to go. And you'll do a better job of designing a question than I can, given not knowing as much about how you're doing the issue. But you can see, I hope, that my message is, think of a question that creates a space for that elected official to share more deeply the whys behind how they're holding this, not just what we all know in terms of they have to have the money to get reelected, but because of the principle of cognitive dissonance, these members will have a much wider range of why they are doing this than just that obvious principle. And once you learn more about that, it gives you more footholds in the future to be a more effective advocate. I think just based on time, I'm going to stop there and invite questions. But I want to come back to, in the end, the most effective advocacy occurs where there is a pre-existing trust relationship. So in each of the existing, and again, I immediately know at certain times it's about scale and protest, but in these one-on-one meetings, I would invite you to think about duly important is not just influencing this member's mind about our issue, but is increasing the trust relationship between myself and this member for our ongoing relationship over time. I hope that's helpful. I'm going to stop there and invite any interest in questions or challenge to what I've said that anyone thinks about. Thank you very much.
Carolyn, thank you so much. This has been again, and wow, that's incredible and such valuable insight for, I'm sure, most folks on this call who, A, have either already had many meetings with their elected officials or will be having their first one coming up on the 25th here. And I do want to kick it up for questions, but Carolyn, real quickly, the list of folks that have signed that civility pledge. Can you send that our way so we can make sure that the folks have that are going to be doing the lobby day on the 25th?
Absolutely. I'll do that on Monday. Happy to do that.
Great. I appreciate that. And I think that what you've just pointed out is so important, and it's such a great part of the process and part of the program that we're trying to implement in terms of building relationships with folks. I don't think that anyone has any, grandiose ideas that will be able to, get someone from opposed to the 28th Amendment to fully supporting it in one meeting. And that idea of finding common ground and thanking them for, their advocacy on a particular issue, or, asking questions and learning more is such a critical part of that. And I really just could not agree with everything that you've just discussed here on the call, and really appreciate it. So we are going to open it up for Q&A. Azer, I'll kick it over to you to help run the Q&A for Dr. Lukensmeyer here, and then we'll go from there.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Lukensmeyer. Thank you, Ben. If you have a question, just go ahead and press 1. Go ahead and press 1 on your keypad so I know to call on you. And when I do, just let me know where you're calling in from, and go ahead and ask your question. Yeah, Carolyn.
And I was just going to say, Carolyn is fine. No need
Okay.
to ask the doctor.
Okay, perfect. It looks like we've got someone with their hand up. I'm going to call on Stephen Fox. Stephen, you're unmuted. Where are you calling in from, and what's your question?
Hi, I hope you can hear me. My name is Steve from Richmond, Virginia. Can you hear me okay?
Great. Can hear you loud and clear. Thanks, Steve. Go ahead.
Great. Okay. My question is very simple. I'm not recording this, and nor do I think I've got the right to, and I can't write as fast as I would like to. I would love to get a copy of what Carolyn just told us. I mean, specifically the words to use, the way to deliver that inviting kind of calming, first sentence, opening to the conversation that I think is just. She gave 2 examples, and I wrote down most of the first one, but I'd love to have a copy of that to make sure I have something to practice with.
Ben and Ed, are you taping this? If you are,
We are
to release.
We are indeed, yes. So the call is recorded, and everyone who's registered and joined the call today will be receiving a link to the recording on Monday.
Perfect.
Yep.
Perfect.
And they're also all past calls, including this one, which will be up on Monday, are on our YouTube channel. So you can go to YouTube and type in American Promise Conference Calls, and you'll see this recording on Monday with all of the past call recordings as well. So thank you for your question, Steve. It looks like we've got another person with their hand up. Frank, I'm going to call on you, Frank. Where are you calling in from, and what's your question?
I'm calling from Concord, North Carolina. My question is we're trying to change people that don't want to be changed. We need something stronger than just sitting down with them and asking them to trust us. I think we need to go after the congressmen that are voting against money in politics and get them out of office. That's what's being done in, I believe, the gun sense group. But to say somebody like Devin Nunes is going to sit down and listen to you, forget it. He doesn't care. He's a stooge. He'll do whatever Trump tells him to do. And the whole.
So if I can, can I jump in here? Can
Yeah.
I, Frank? I completely understand your perspective, and was even trying in the short time I had to acknowledge that any successful movement that has produced federal legislation to move the country forward. Let's just take civil rights. For civil rights to get as far as it did, it was absolutely essential that the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee be operating at the same time as Martin Luther King's Southern Christian leadership. Yes, to change public policy, we need the entire spectrum of different kinds of action. you named a member of Congress who, no, I would not recommend the perspective that I took in this call. But there are very few Devin Nuneses in terms of that extreme. And there are many, many members of Congress who actually are already wise about what's not working in the dysfunction and are looking for ways to find a different level of support from the public. So there's a very strategic decision to be made in terms of the person you're sitting in front of. But yes, for an effective movement, there has to be high-powered, very large-scale protest, push movements, vote them out of office. That's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is it's really, you can demonstrate time and time again that sometimes behavior change is very paradoxical, that you actually join with the person where they are and give them enough space to express themselves, and a transformation process begins to happen in that person. So these are two ends of a spectrum, both of which are really important to produce political policy change, but you have to make the judgment of who you're sitting in front of. Thank you for your very important question.
Yeah, thank you. And if I
Yes.
could also add there, Carolyn, I completely agree with you. And if I could also add here, for a constitutional amendment, as most folks knows, we need 67 votes in the Senate and 290 in the House. We are going to have to build relationships with folks that might not necessarily disagree or that might disagree with us right now, because to get that many votes in Congress to eventually get this amendment out of Congress and to the states for ratification, there's no way that electorally we'll just be able to elect people that just agree with us, which is why this relationship building process that Carolyn has discussed and what the National Institute for Civil Discourse does so well, why that is so important, especially in the work that we're doing in Money in Politics. And so, and I certainly agree that there will be some who will be immovable, and certainly, in terms, and to kind of just reflect upon what Carolyn was saying is, yes, whether it's building a grassroots campaign to replace that person in office or protest or whatever, there are many opportunities to essentially enact the change that we seek, but we can't just give up on folks either, which is why it's such a critical message that Caroline's delivering, and why this lobby day and all the work that we're doing to change hearts and minds is so important. So, but thank you for the question as well. And Azra, I'll kick it back over to you.
Great, and I think we've got time for maybe one more question, and I'm going to pass it over to Ellen Green-Bush. Ellen, where are you calling in from, and what is your question?
Hi, I'm calling in from Portland, Ohio, and in order to develop a relationship with a legislator or their staff person, it has to be ongoing. In other words, after that first meeting, my question is, what kind of strategies can you have for trying to maintain a relationship with them when it isn't possible to always meet face-to-face?
That's a great question, Ellen. I didn't catch where you're calling in from. Do you mind saying that again?
I'm from Port Clinton, Ohio.
Okay, perfect. So, and you said something that I want to underline, because the way I spoke, I was always talking about the member. And yes, in many cases, it is equally important for this relationship to get established at the staff level as well as the member level. The challenge for elected officials is they are bombarded on a constant basis by so many interests, by so many different groups. So in your first and early encounters with the member/staff, what you want to try to learn is what kind of information would it be useful to them for you to bring to them about their constituents. We've come to a place where members predominantly rely on poll data for their constituents' views on an issue like the 28th Amendment or where we are on money and politics. So I'm going to give an example of the kind of work we do and present to members, just because I think the principle may help you with the question, Ellen. So we bring together people in localities who hold different views. In our current climate, often starting with some voted for Hillary and some voted for Trump. In Ohio, it will not surprise you. The next step is very often the opioid crisis and what's the government's role versus personal responsibility in where we are with the opioid crisis. So when we've done several groups like that, we can go back to a member or to a staffer and give them much more nuanced data about how their constituents are feeling about this, particularly when they have had a conversation across their differences. So the principle, Ellen, is find out what they would like to know from their constituents and see if you can be in a position, in Port Clinton in this case, to actually track that kind of information over time and become a trusted source. Is that helpful?
Yep. Thank you so much for that, Carolyn. I think we've got time for one more question if someone has one. Go ahead and press 1 on your keypad, and I'll know to call on you. If anyone has time for one more question, and I'll give folks a couple seconds here. But maybe I'll ask the question I've been really curious to ask, Carolyn, is what if you're doing one of these outreach meetings to someone in your community and, to no fault of your own, you're met with open hostility. Someone really doesn't want to talk to you and wants the whole room to know they don't want to talk to you. How do you advise people respond to any situation like that if one arises?
Well, the first principle, and it's a great question. The first principle is know enough about yourself, how you actually respond in that circumstance, to be sure that you're capable of staying calm. For most of us, when we're attacked with hostility, it's built into our physiology actually, fight or flight. The natural response is two extremes, either to hit back or to, in some way, flee the situation. So the first principle is understand your own physiology well enough. All of you on this call know when this happens to you, something shifts internally in you. Some of us stop breathing or move to very shallow breath. Some of us are very quick mentally and we hit back. So principle 1, stay calm. And the quickest way to do that if someone's really caught you off guard is to just pause and take a deep breath so that you are not reacting. And then, again, this is very hard generically, but I'll try to give a couple of examples. These are things I've actually done in town hall meetings. Sir, I can see that given the level of your anger, or again, a neutral word, a descriptive word, that this issue is really important to you. And what we're talking about has literally made you angry. That's not our goal. We're not here. And then you see where that would go. So the goal is yourself, don't be reactive, and pick words that will neutralize the situation. Once something like that, the primary principle is stay calm and do not escalate.
That's really great advice. Thank you so much, Carolyn. And that's all the time we've got for questions, but just want to extend a huge thank you for taking the time to be here today.
Well, I very much appreciate being invited. The work that all of you are doing is essential to our democracy, and all of us at NICD hope that we can join with the American Promise to continue to really amplify each other's work across the country.
Fantastic. Much appreciated. And we'll move on. And before we get to our call's grassroots victory, I just want to start with some actions taken recently. Last year, APA members had 17 meetings with elected officials or their staff. And so far this year, APA members have already had 20 meetings. And I'm just wanting to wait for it to calm down a little bit. All right, we can hear a little bit better now. And our goal this year is 100 meetings with members of Congress, and we're well on our way. On June 25th, Lobby Day alone, we have over 50 meetings with members of Congress or their staff scheduled, and more are being scheduled for Lobby Day and just in district, in their home districts. Those meetings are being scheduled all the time as well. There were 26 media pieces published by APAs last year. So far this year, there've already been 34 media pieces published by APAs, and our goal is 106 pieces published in all of 2018. So it's all to say that there's a growing number of people who are passionate about fighting for a government which truly represents us, the people, and that's good news for everyone. I've got a feeling some people on this call might know a couple of these people. We want to make sure that we know about your meetings with elected officials and your media pieces published, so we can include them in our next month's total. So if you've had a meeting with an elected official or their staff, or have had a media piece published, you can go to AmericanPromise.net, and on the Take Action drop-down menu, you'll see the Citizen Uprising Reporting Forms option, and just use the proper report form. They're simple, they don't take long at all, and let us know about your meeting, your public event, or your local resolution even. And the growth we've seen in these numbers is really exciting and indicative of more and more folks stepping up to get big money out of politics. And I'm now going to pass it over to one of these people, Mitch Rothman, who's a member of the Narberth, Pennsylvania American Promise Association, who's going to share about his group's recent experience planning and executing an outreach meeting in their community. Hey, Mitch, thank you for being here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you loud and clear.
Oh, great. Hi, everybody. When I got involved with this, as an anthropologist, I'm always keenly aware that what motivates people into action is more about emotion than intellect. We know that 80% of the people surveyed from all political persuasions agree intellectually that there's too much money in politics. But to reach a tipping point, which we have to, where enough people act so that legislators realize that it's in their interest to undo Citizens United, we need to generate that kind of emotional response and explain clearly how to act, to change, to create change. So what we did in our Narberth Lower Merion group is we created a program to see if we could do that. What we did was we took as a centerpiece a 60-minute segment on how Big Pharma brought the acquiescence of the federal government to enable the opioid crisis. Our program started with an explanation of what Citizens United did and how American Promise was organizing to change it through passage of the 28th Amendment, starting locally with the passage of Pennsylvania H.R. 440 to demand that Congress act, and that took us about 7 minutes. We then showed the 60-minute segment, which was about 20 minutes, and had one of our group lead a discussion for about 15 minutes. Then another member of our group got up and asked the question, well, how did this happen? We then showed the video from American Promise on the website and also on YouTube about Judge Powell and the legal effort to make corporations people, ending with an address from the CEO of American Promise. That took about 7 minutes. So it wasn't very long so far, but we thought we needed to do something to take the people who came right from watching and listening and hopefully getting excited and geared up to immediate action. And so our critical last step was to convert the program into that action. Everyone, even our own members, then and there wrote a letter to their Pennsylvania representative and senator asking them to support H.R. 440. When this was done, we announced the date of our next meeting, hopefully bringing in more people, and adjourned. We, of course, took all the contact information for everybody who came when they did. The program, I think, was very effective, but the other thing I think it's really good for is we plan to take it on the road. Now that we've sort of worked it out and how it should work, we're planning on going to some activist communities, some senior centers, maybe if they'll let us in, some public libraries, but try to get people really engaged, really moving into action more than just intellectually, as so many of us do say, oh, that's terrible, and then, go on to do whatever else. And so we think this is a sort of a nice model that people can use to try to engender that kind of support and move us toward a tipping point where we can actually pass the 28th Amendment.
Fantastic, Mitchell. Thank you so much, and congratulations again to you and your team on the fantastic work. It was a real thrill to come out to Narberth in the Lower Merion last November, I think, for the group's launch meeting, to go through the 4 group trainings with you guys, and now, to hear about this outreach meeting you guys have done and want to continue to do. It's just fantastic, and thanks for being here again.
Thank you.
And if there's anyone who's not yet in an APA who's on the call and wants to learn more about starting an APA, feel free to send me an email at azorc, AZORC, at AmericanPromise.net. And again, Mitchell, I'm sure folks on this call are very curious to, learn as much as they can about this replicable outreach meeting. So that collaboration down the line, I'm sure, is something that we'll be able to work on in that regard. I'm now going to transition a little bit to talk about this month's action, which is writing letters to the editor about how winning the 28th Amendment to get big money out of politics isn't a partisan issue, but an American one, and will require respectful conversations for change. It's the exact type of open civil discourse Dr. Lukensmeyer was talking about, and the type required to execute a successful outreach meeting like the one Mitchell just talked about too. And a letter to the editor really is a powerful thing to be able to show to community members, as well as bring to meetings with elected officials. So you all should have the action sheet with detailed instructions for best practices on this. And I'm just going to really quickly touch over 3 studies which are listed on the action sheet. The first was a 2018 report from University of Maryland, which said 85% of Democrats and 66% of Republicans want a constitutional amendment to overturn the effects of the Citizens United decision. An Associated Press 2017 polls found 3/4 of Americans, similar to what Dr. Carolyn, was saying. 3/4 of Americans feel they lack political influence. So this information and some more is included in the action sheet, but we're now just going to switch gears a little bit and get into the training portion of the call, because as you all know, the NCLC, the National Leadership Conference, is this month from June 22nd to the 25th. www.citizenleaders.us is the conference website, and there's registration info listed there. And the grand finale of the conference really is Lobby Day, where folks are scheduling meetings with their members of Congress. We already have over 50 scheduled. Because in all of the 28th Amendment bills in Congress, there's only one Republican who's a current co-sponsor of federal legislation. And I'm going to bring Ben Gubitz back on the call to describe a major piece of our strategy to change this and really to win. Hey, Ben.
Hello again to all. That was, and I'll just say, that was such a great and inspiring, message from Carolyn. I think it's so much in line with all of the work that we're trying to do here at American Promise in terms of building relationships with members of Congress and moving them up the champion scale. Today's political climate is so polarized. We all know that, and it's so hard to ask a Republican to co-sponsor a bill that has all Democrats on it, just like every amendment proposal that's in Congress. And so, taking a page out of the Citizens Climate Lobby book, where they've been able to pull just about 40 Republicans on board into a climate solutions caucus to say that climate change is real and partially man-made, and we need public and private solutions. One of the ways that they did that was to start with a Republican-only resolution in Congress, mostly on principles, and then we can start to build that. Once we can get them to agree with the principles, start to move them kind of up the champion scale. And so, that's really the reason why, we think that a Republican-only resolution is really going to be effective and getting folks and getting members to agree purely on principle, as opposed to just asking them flat out to co-sponsor a bill loaded up with Democrats. That's just unlikely to happen at this point in time. And this is really just a preliminary step to get more Republicans co-sponsors on board. Again, we need 67 in the Senate, 290 in the House to get this amendment out of Congress, and the only way to do that is to make sure that we have representation from all parties on an amendment proposal. And so it's not a binding piece of legislation that we're asking folks to sign, but it will be an invaluable, starting point to ultimately get Republicans on board. And this is still a work in progress. We should have, finalized language on this sometime here in the next week or so. We're sending it around for comment from lots of different folks, including, many folks that approach this issue from the conservative side, to make sure that, what we're putting down here will resonate with folks and make sure that this is successful. But I really do feel like that this could be, the break that we're looking for, right? We know that, like Azer said in the polling, that the majority of Americans are with us. We know that the Democrats will sign on. We really need to start getting some Republican sponsors on board for the amendment. And I can read just a couple of excerpts from what we're thinking this resolution might say. And I'd love to hear any insight or any advice from anyone on things that they might want to add. But this is how it starts. Expressing the commitment of the Congress of the United States to protect and preserve our Constitution and our Republic through the means of a constitutional amendment, whereas stewardship of our founding document, protection of our Republic for future generations, caution about concentrated power of corporations and wealthy individuals, and preservation of free speech, equal citizenship, and integrity of elections are American values and responsibilities. And then it goes on, and there's a few more whereases. Those that know what bills look like, there are a few more paragraphs of supporting statements, but that's just a flavor of what we're hoping to present to folks, especially on Lobby Day. And if you're not coming to Washington, D.C. for the conference and going to Lobby Day, perhaps something that you can use for in-district meetings. But, again, I believe that this is going to be an invaluable, part of the process to bringing more Republicans on board so we can ratify this amendment in the time frame that we're hoping, which is not 20, 30, 40, 50 years, a generation from now, really just a few short years away. So happy to open it up for Q&A again. I know that we have about 10 minutes left or so. If anyone has questions on this, on Lobby Day, on the conference, on things that Carolyn Lukensmeyer said, anything that might pop up, happy to answer any questions that anyone might have. But again, I just really want to reiterate how much I appreciate everyone's involvement on this phone and commitment to this really historic work and really the cause of our time. So thanks to all, and I'm happy to stay on for a little bit longer to answer some questions that folks have.
Great, thanks, Ben. So if anyone has a question, go ahead and press 2 on your keypad, so I'll know to call on you. Go ahead and press 2 for a question on this Republican resolution, on something Carolyn said, on some Lobby Day specifics. Go ahead and press 2, and I'll give folks a couple seconds here. While we're waiting, Ben, you mentioned that this is something similar to what the Citizens Climate Lobby has done. Can you just expand on how effective this has been for them and how they're working to translate it into real legislation?
Sure. Yeah, it really has been. A lot of the organizing work and a lot of this model about building relationships with our member of Congress and utilizing a lot of the principles that Caroline just discussed, is in line with this organization called Citizens Climate Lobby, where they're working towards practical and realistic climate solutions in Congress. 5 years ago, had 0 members of Congress or 0 Republicans on board to what they were proposing, and now have 40 Republicans on board a climate solutions caucus, 40 Republicans, 40 Democrats, You weren't able to join as a Democrat unless there was a Republican counterpart to really create this space and, quite frankly, the political coverage so that folks could feel comfortable to and have the political will to advocate for what's right. Now, I think that it's important to have a similar discussion with folks, and we certainly are going to look to, get, maybe 5 or 8 or 10 or a dozen of these, Republicans to sign on to this resolution before we actually roll this out, publicly, and also to actually physically introduce a new bill in Congress, just to make sure that folks do have that kind of political cover. As we know, it's tough being the first one in the water, but it's worked very, very well for the Citizens Climate Lobby. We're seeing Republicans come around to climate solutions based on the work that they've done, similar to the model that we're trying to do. And I really do think that this is going to be a really effective and positive step in the right direction for the 28th Amendment. So does anyone else have any questions about this?
If you've got a question, go ahead and press 2 on your keypad. It looks like someone has their hand up. It is Ellen Greenbush again. Ellen, remind folks where you're calling in from and what's your question.
I'm calling in from Port Clinton, Ohio, and I just wanted to ask you, Ben, is this non-binding resolution going to be available to us when we go to lobby with our Republican legislators?
Yes, absolutely, Ellen. Nice to hear from you. Great question, and it absolutely will be, and we're hoping that this will be something that you can present to Republican members of Congress as you're meeting with them. And we should be able to send around a draft of this sometime by the end of next week or so.
Okay, and then also, has there been an effort to ask any members of Congress to form a bipartisan caucus like was done with the Citizens Climate Lobby? I mean, for example, my House person is very supportive. Is it a reasonable ask, or has that ever been done by American Promise to try to get something like that going around the 28th Amendment?
Great question. I think that this is the first step in that direction. That has not happened yet. We do think that will ultimately be effective, and I think that having this resolution put forth to certain members, especially Republican members, is the right step in that direction to where we can have a bipartisan caucus. Again, a lot. It is non-binding. A lot of folks, what they'll be signing on to are in principle, and getting them to that point to where they can then certainly join a bipartisan caucus is, I think, going to be very effective. We'll see, but I think that this is the first step in that direction, Ellen.
Okay, so that's a long-term goal then, or
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely. We have some work to do, to build some relationships and make sure that we are considering the best ways to bring all parties onto amendment resolutions, and so we think that this is a good step in that direction, and certainly it will take some time. It's not going to happen overnight. I believe with CCL it took them at least 3 or 4 years to get up to where they are now with 40 members. But imagine the power that we would have if we had 40 Republican members of Congress on board the 28th Amendment. It would be a game changer. It would be a complete game changer, and I think that we would see the needle really starting to move in terms of getting ready to push this out to the states for ratification. So I'm excited about it, and I think this is going to be a good step in the right direction.
Okay, thanks, Ben.
Thank you, Ellen.
And thank you for the question, Ellen. We've got time for one more. If someone has one last question they want to ask, go ahead and press 2 on your keypad. And while we're waiting, I'll just add, for folks that are going to the conference, there will be a lobby day registration table where, I'll have printed out copies of this non-binding resolution we're talking about. And folks will have plenty of time to read it over and practice with their groups beforehand. And then, of course, it'll be online too to be used at in-district meetings. But it looks like no one else has a question. And Ben, I just had one last thing I'm curious about. Have people, who, for example, are signed on to the Citizens Climate Lobby, Climate Solutions Caucus, been, to your knowledge, targeted and successfully targeted by, say, large money fossil fuel interests who don't want them to be on this caucus? Has there been significant pushback, even when it is a bipartisan caucus?
It's a good question, Azer. I'm not sure of the details on that, and I'd love to actually follow up with CCL to see if that were the case. I know that some of those members on the caucus are retiring and not running for re-election in 2018 in the midterms. I don't know if that's because of pushback or not, but folks that were early signers on this thing, like Carlos Curbelo in Florida, Elena Ross Lightning from Florida as well, took a tremendous amount of courage to step out in front and still seem to be very popular in their districts. So, in terms of direct attacks, I'm not sure. It's a really good question, and I think that we should talk to them a little bit about what is to be expected once folks do sign on to this, to make sure that members are prepared. But I don't have any specifics on that.
Cool. It makes a lot of sense why it's the sort of stepping stone strategy, which would be most effective. I know a couple months ago we heard from John Pudner and Steve Lipscomb, and they really emphasized, the 5-tiered champion scale. And at any moment, we're not trying to get someone from 1 to 5 or 2 to 4. We're trying to get them from 2 to 3 and 4 to 5. So it's about 1:57 here on the East Coast. We've got just a minute or two more, but I'm going to close out the call, which I think has been a really fantastic and interesting one. So if you're with your group members when we hang up, go ahead and write and send in those letters to the editor. And if there is something striking that Carol Lukensmeyer said, or that Mitch said, or that one of these question askers said, feel free to include that, and by all means include that while it's still fresh in your letter to the editor. Just a huge thank you to all of you guys for being on the call, for Mitch for sharing the outreach work that's being done in Narberth and Lower Merion, and just the idea of walking into new relationships. The one line that Carolyn said, which was really stuck with me, was, walking in thinking my mind could be the one changed instead of yours. And that openness and hearing, another person's perspective and not judging it actively or even agreeing with it actively, just hearing and collaborating is what it's all about. So Ben, if you've got any last words, happy to pass it back over to you before we close out the call, maybe a minute early.
Only 3 words. I guess that's more than 4 words. See you in D.C. at the conference. Wonderful to be with everyone today. I can't wait. If you haven't registered for the conference, do so now. It's going to be a great program. Being able to put faces with names and learn from each other all across the country and all of the amazing things that we're doing. It's great to be able to connect on conference calls and online, but really that kind of face-to-face connection and human interaction is such a critical component of the work that we do. So we will see everyone in Washington. Until then, feel free to reach out with any questions. Big thanks to Mitch. Big thanks to Carolyn, Azer, and everyone on the call, and we'll talk to everyone soon.
Great. I'm putting everyone off mute, so goodbye, everyone. See you next month, or maybe sooner.
Thanks, Azer, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Everyone have a nice sunny Saturday, I hope.